We are live. Hey everyone, welcome to Comic Artist Pro Secrets. I am Ethan Van Sciver, believe it or not. I really am. That's who. That's what my mom named me, and we are here tonight for a very interesting show. Um, I don't know if you've been following. I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have been following my YouTube page. I've done a series of videos, um, kind of debating with this fellow. He is a new comic book publisher. His name is Vox Dei, and he has an extraordinary thing going on right now. He has decided to crowdfund a series called Alt Hero, and it immediately. Let's see here. Let me double check my stats to just make sure this is correct. But he raised $25,000 in 4 hours, and that was basically his entire goal. And then within a few days, he hit $122,000 in donations, and at this point, he's really close to $250,000. That's enough money to publish a comic book. In fact, it's enough money to publish a few comic books. I have many questions for him about his motivations for why he's doing this and what his goals are. But first, I would like to introduce you, if he's ready, to the man himself. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Vox Dei. Hello.
Hello, Ethan. Thanks for having me. It's very generous of you and charitable in light of our exchanges.
Well, I mean, I hope you don't take them personally. It's difficult to endure criticism, you know, in this business when you're producing art, especially harsh criticism. A lot of people have been asking me to do portfolio reviews live, and I can't imagine doing that to people who are just starting. I think that it would break hearts. I can't be sure that people would take it well. But you're Vox Dei. I don't really have to worry about you
No,
taking criticism in a devastating way.
well,
Um,
I try to put it in perspective for people. First of all, um, I'm a lifelong Vikings fan, so I have no emotions left anymore. They've all been ripped out of me by, Roger Staubach and the Atlanta Falcons and
yeah.
the New
Well, I
Orleans
live in
Saints.
Philadelphia, so hello.
But the other thing is that, I was a nationally syndicated columnist, both for video game reviews and as well as opinion editorial. And back in 2001, in my first year of writing opinion editorial, I happened to upset the Council for American Islamic Relations, and they actually made me their action item of the day, which resulted in literally hundreds of emailed death threats and all that kind of stuff. And so, when that's kind of your baptism into public commentary and whatnot, um, you know, having people tell me that my books suck, my columns suck, my comics suck, whatever, it really doesn't upset me very much.
No, I wouldn't think
It's
so. What was that essay about?
it was actually about Israel and Palestine. It was just a very straightforward um, addressing of the issue, and for whatever reason, somebody within the wrong organization picked it up, and you know how it is now. I mean, it was less common then because social media was not as prevalent, but they had a mechanism for whipping up instant outrage, and it was kind of funny because I wasn't that concerned about it because it was very clear that virtually none of the people had actually read anything. This was just their action item of the day. They did it, and then literally 2 days later, nothing. They'd moved on.
Yeah. Well, I want to say at the outset that the purpose of my channel here is not to espouse politics one way or the other. I have had extreme lefties on here, and I treat them as artists and fellow professionals. I've had moderates, and I've had a couple of righties, and you're definitely one of those. I think. Would you define yourself as a right winger?
Oh yeah, I would say that I'm fairly hard right.
Okay. So just so people understand, I mean, on this channel, I kind of am equal opportunity, and we talk about comics. No one is excluded. One of my personal goals is to make comic books inclusive. I know a lot of people tell me that's impossible, but I do believe that there's room in this business for everyone, and everyone should be kind of judged on the merit of the work that they're producing rather than the stuff that they post on social media. And wouldn't it be nice if that were possible?
I admire your dream, but I haven't seen any sign of that in practically any industry, from computer games to investment banking to you name it. Um, the personal is now political.
Hmm.
It used to just be one place, and that was that was the big lesson of Gamergate, because most of the people in Gamergate were actually, of the left, weren't political at all, but they just wanted to be left alone to play their games. And
What
they had
was
discovered
Gamergate? What was Gamergate?
Gamergate was the revolt of the gamers against the gaming media.
Why did there need to be a revolt against the gaming media? Explain that.
um, I don't want to go into too much detail because I'd much rather talk about the comics industry. But essentially, what happened was it was discovered that a woman who was more of a fake game designer than an actual one, um, had been involved with a member of the media who had uh, given her game a fair amount of publicity and so forth. And so this came out when her boyfriend posted a big thing,
Uh,
and it just turned into this massive, crazy, gaming media wide thing, because instead of just fessing up and saying, yeah, we shouldn't have done that, they started attacking everybody who was saying, hey, this is wrong. Because, everybody who was actually a gamer understood that, this was basically a little text adventure, circa 1980. It was not a serious game. And yet, it had gotten lots of mentions in the media and stuff. And so people were wondering about that. And then what happened was a group of gaming media professionals formed a secret group, a mailing list, and then they timed. I think it consisted of 28 or 29 different pieces published on the same day or within 2 days, talking about how gamers are dead, and um, it's just absurd, And so people reacted to that, and went after Gawker's advertisers, because Gawker was kind of ground zero for the anti-Gamergate folks. And then they kept amping, instead of giving in, they kept thinking, well, if we run to the New York Times and we tell them that, these people are threatening us, then we'll somehow win. And it got so crazy that they actually based a issue of Special Victims Unit, a TV show, on Gamergate, claiming that, Gamergate had kidnapped this woman. And it was just, the whole thing was totally over the top, and it was total bullshit from start to finish.
how were you involved?
Um, I've been in the gaming industry since 1991, and I just commented on my blog before it was actually called Gamergate, because to me, it was very obvious that there was something hinky going on. The game that they were talking about, there was no reason that any gaming media should have paid 2 minutes of it. It should have paid any attention to this little, you know, paint by numbers, use a game development kit text adventure. I mean, it would be basically like, I mean, think about how amateurish you thought Quantum Mortis looked. But imagine if it was nothing but like finger painted stick figures, ineptly done. That's how bad this particular game was. And yet it was mentioned on like, 6 or 7 media sites as if it was the serious game. And everyone, and basically all the gamers were just saying, what the hell is going on?
Right.
Imagine if Bleeding Cool and ICV2 and stuff suddenly started talking about this new comic that was, essentially a finger painted stick figures. That was badly written. Wouldn't you get a little suspicious that, hey, what's up here? And so it was basically the SJWs in the gaming media doubling down, doubling down, doubling down, and doubling down again. And of course, they picked the worst possible people in the world to do that to, because of course, nobody has more time and patience than gamers.
Okay, why don't you tell me what an SJW is? I mean, I have an idea. You're the expert.
All right. Well, back in 1850 or so, maybe before, I can't remember the date, John Stuart Mill concocted the idea of a new type of justice. And prior to this, all of the concepts of justice tended to involve individuals. An individual would seek justice, an individual would be brought to justice, and so forth. But he created this new concept of social justice, which involved the entire society and every organization converging towards the utilitarian good of the many. Now, of course, utilitarian philosophy has turned out to be a non-starter. Anybody who studies philosophy understands this and knows why. But the social justice aspect has survived, even though the utilitarianism is no longer a part of it. And so the social justice warriors are essentially the people who are culturally and politically to the left of what you or I would consider to be the sane left. We're not talking about people who are committed socialists. We're not talking even about people who are committed communists. We're talking about people who are subscribe to this ever mutating, very nebulous narrative that changes on a regular basis. And it's impossible. I've written 2 books on the subject. SJWs always lie and SJWs always double down. And if anybody's interested in the concept, I go into it in considerable detail there.
Well, so was Martin Luther King, since it's his day, was he a social justice warrior or no?
No, he would definitely not count as a social justice warrior.
Why not?
Because for 2 reasons. Number one, he was too early. His concept of justice, his various concepts of justice would not be compatible with the utilitarian social form of it. And secondly, Luther had fairly strong positions. Hier stehe ich, kann nicht anders. Here I stand, I can do no other. He was not, did not subscribe to an ever mutating narrative that was, constantly shifting the way that the SJW narrative is.
Right. All right. So how did Gamergate end? What was the finale? Is it still going? Is it over?
Oh, the ride never ends. Yeah, that's actually one of our. Some people, Gamergate. You'll notice that a lot of our symbology that we use involves skeletons and whatever, just because ever since that original "gamers are dead" thing, Gamergate has been pronounced dead on many occasions, and yet it always flares up again whenever there's a new issue. I will say that right now everything is pretty tranquil. The game developers have always been quietly on the side of Gamergate. The crazier SJWs have mostly either been, boxed in or let go, and so and the media is all terrified, of course, because of the Gawker lawsuit. The fact that they talk about the whole thing. Oh, the Hulk Hogan doesn't have anything to do with it, but it absolutely did. And so, the media basically just doesn't want to touch it.
Okay. All right. So here's the thing. Last year, I was looking at Twitter, and this thing showed up. We were enduring this very strange moment where suddenly the Confederate flag, which I have no affinity for. I have to say, I grew up in the Northeast. I'm a Jersey boy. I've lived in the South. It's fun, but I don't really give a damn about the Confederate flag. But suddenly, it was considered to be a racist symbol of a reminder of the way the South used to be, and it was demanded. It seems socially demanded, and I think that most moderates kind of conceded that the Confederate flag kind of be removed wherever it was displayed uh, in a public facility. Okay, so around and then shortly thereafter, after this was kind of dying down, I did see Alt Hero. And first of all, Alt Hero is a beautiful woman who is kind of scantily dressed, who seems to be wearing a Confederate flag kind of motif for a costume. And that this is how I was introduced to this character. So it's important that when we talk about Alt Hero, we kind of recognize the timing of how this character was presented. Right
Right.
when this Confederate flag issue, the tearing down of Confederate monuments and statues, right when that was white hot, when that was in the news and in the media, here comes this guy Vox Dei, and that was how I first heard of you. I hadn't heard of you before with this Alt Hero character. How come?
That was absolutely intentional.
Sure.
I absolutely oppose what the SJWs are doing. They are always, it goes back to the French Revolution. They are always attempting to go back, to create year one and erase history. And they want to redefine reality. They want to erase history. They want to, pretend history doesn't exist. Today yesterday it was the Confederate flag. Before long, it's going to be the United States flag. I mean, you've already seen that, happen a little bit in California and stuff. But that's what I meant about the mutating narrative. There will always be a new target because they live for conflict. They need the conflict, and so that's why it is always a mistake to try to appease them. It is always a mistake to try to reason with them because it is totally impossible. And people make that same mistake over and over and over again. And what I learned, in my experiences with SJWs in the science fiction field and also during Gamergate, I realized very quickly that they are all offense, no defense. And so the most effective thing that you can do is absolutely refuse to give in and push all their buttons, trigger them, hit them in the mouth with the very symbology they're trying to deny you. The interesting thing is, I live in Europe. I've lived here most of my life. And, the rebel flag here, the Confederate flag here, is actually utilized by rebels in Italy, in Ukraine, in Russia, everywhere. The Confederate flag means rebellion. And it's extremely popular among the youth in Europe as a result.
What part of Europe are you in right now? In
Italia.
France? Oh, cool. Okay, beautiful. I love Italy. Yeah. So, but even still, is there a point? Is there a point made about the Confederate flag, at least in the United States? And I think Alt Hero is an American hero. The Confederate flag symbolizes this rebellion against the South. The South basically saying, "Hey, we need slavery to maintain our economy. We will be devastated without slavery. We are fighting to maintain slavery." And they were beaten.
Yeah, sure. That's the common narrative. Of course, it's very uncomfortable to point out that there were several slave states in the Union fighting to preserve the Union. But that's a huge can of worms. I mean, we could go on for 4 hours about that.
Okay.
The relevant point with regards to the comics thing is that, first of all, Alt Hero is actually global. Rebel and Michael Martell and some of those characters happen to be the American ones. But we actually have a major storyline that involves what we call the Global Justice Initiative, which is actually the European Union's superhero team, which is led by Captain Europa. And then we also have a sort of, I guess you would call it a military superhero angle that involves the Chinese People Liberation Army as well as the Japanese and Russian armed forces.
Right.
So, we've actually built a very large superhero world that's an alternate history. And then Chuck Dixon is, he likes to do the street level stuff. And so what he is building is he's building our city of Avalon, and we're building the entire city. And so he's doing the street level stories that involve, sort of the smaller superheroes, the smaller stories, but it all fits within the same world. And there is some interaction between the larger scale stuff happening in Paris, happening in Vancouver, and what's going on in Avalon.
So you finished with Gamergate, essentially. You were a part of Gamergate. What made you recognize the comic book industry as a battleground for you to sort of stage this fight on?
Well,
if you were upset about the Confederate flag stuff that was going on, and you recognized that this was just the ever-changing whim of the SJW, why fight this out in comic books?
Well, first of all, there's two things I should mention. I'm the lead editor for a publishing house called Castalia House. We publish science fiction, we publish military strategy. We publish a fair amount of esoteric stuff, basically because, I have a number of friends in a number of industries that happen to write books. I think we're doing a new book. We just signed a contract to do a new book for education in India, 1813 to 2013 or something like that. I have absolutely no interest whatsoever to anyone who's listening to this. The point is that we just do this esoteric stuff because we can. I had been encouraged, basically lobbied by one of our cover artists for years to do comics. And I really wasn't that interested. I'm not a big comics reader. I did do the dialogue for 3 Archangels comics about 10 years ago. But I'm a gamer, always have been. That's my industry. I don't even consider myself really a writer. I'm a gamer. I'm a game designer. But people were saying, "Oh, you should get into comics. You should do comics." Blah blah blah. And I wasn't that interested. But then when I know and I've seen what happened in the world of science fiction, I've seen the market shrink and contract like crazy. It's very common once an industry gets sufficiently SJW converged. Usually the business shrinks about 50%. We've already seen it in NASCAR. It's happening right now in the NFL. It's happened. It has happened to a certain extent. It's in the process of happening to Marvel and DC. And so I knew that there was going to be a ever-growing market of people who didn't want the stuff that DC and Marvel were going to be coming out with. Not necessarily what they were coming out with already, but what they were going to come out with, because this is 18 months ago. And then I looked further into it, and I saw that the industry is structurally handicapped by the monopoly that Diamond has over the comic stores. And the results of that is that the comic stores are dying out because Diamond is taking too much of the available pool of money. You can work it out for yourself from the numbers that Comicron gives you. Diamond's taking about twice what a normal distributor would be expected to take. And if you just walk through those numbers, the excess that Diamond is taking is more than $33,000 of profit out of every single comic book store in the country.
Yeah.
And so what that told me is that not only is there an opportunity on the creative side, but there's also an opportunity on the business side. And so I started looking into it a bit. And then I said, look, we'll just do a Kickstarter. I don't know anything about this stuff. The beautiful thing about Kickstarter is it allows you to understand if there's a market or not. If we do Alt Hero and nobody wants to give us any money to do it, okay, it's a stupid idea, and I can tell my guys that are encouraging me to do it, you know what, it's a dumb idea, we're not going to do it. So we went ahead and did the campaign. I actually put it up at, I think, around about now, so about 1 or 2 in the morning my time. We decided that if we could raise $25,000, then we would do a couple comic books and so forth. And then I went to bed, didn't think anything of it. And I was kind of shocked when I got up the next morning and turned it on. I was hoping, I knew some of our guys would come through, so I was hoping that maybe we'd have raised 5,000 or something, get us off to a good start for the month. It being a 30-day campaign, and I was very surprised to see that it was already at 27,000. By the end of the first 24 hours, it was at 37, and we actually ended up north of 250,000 because some people came in, didn't go directly through the public campaign. And the remarkable thing about it is that there have been 10,550 kickstarted campaigns, crowdfunded campaigns related to comics. And Alt Hero is the 21st largest out of those 10,550. And it is the #1 biggest for a brand new comic, because most of the bigger ones have been existing comic series and web comics and whatever that have a big following, that are, maybe they're printing 10 years of their stuff or whatever, and so forth. So that confirmed that there was this big interest in people that didn't want what the current comic publishers were offering them. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where you might actually find, and this is where I'll just throw this out there. If you're an artist or if you're a independent publisher who is interested in working with us, feel free to shoot me an email, because what we are doing is we're teaming up with a very large distribution company that is going to be distributing to all the comic stores, and they offer uniformly better terms than Diamond does. They could buy Diamond with their lunch money, and they are working very closely with us so that we're going to be able to bring comics back to the $2.99 price point. And so, for full 24-page, full color, et cetera, et cetera. There's new color printers coming out. There's new technologies coming out that make this possible. And when you've got a very large distribution company that has that kind of ability to offer really good credit lines, generous payment terms, excuse me, and good discounts, this has the possibility to significantly help the comics industry, because, like I said, the biggest single problem right now is the fact that about 22%, 23% of every dollar that gets spent at retail goes to Diamond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm on your Kickstarter right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't be that amazed that you raised $25,000 so quickly. You've got private backers here donating $5,000 each. Let's see, 5 of them. There's your 25 grand right there. Here's another one.
In fairness, only one of them popped up on the first day.
Who are these people? Do you know who they are?
Well, I do now. I
No, there's
didn't know,
6 of them.
I didn't know any of them at the time.
Are they comic book fans? Who are these people that are donating $5,000 to a comic book Kickstarter campaign by a brand new, unestablished comic book writer, a guy who says he's going to write comic books, that are overtly political? Who are these 6 people? And then there's a next rung of people who are donating $2,500. Also, there seems to be, if you look at the,
it's
okay,
a big mix. Like, I'll give you an example. There, some of them are fans of mine. My books are very popular. I'm actually, arguably the best-selling political philosopher alive right now. And also my epic fantasy fiction is quite popular. So I have, my blog gets about 100 to 105,000 page views a day. So there's a fair number of folks that, follow my stuff, and some of them are very well off. In other cases, we have one example where there is a couple where the wife is a fitness model, and she's basically using it as marketing because we've used her as the model for the hero. And she's fantastic. And there's nobody in her country who has anything like this. And so for them, it's a very inexpensive way to really separate herself from her massive competitors. And so, a lot of people have different reasons, have different interests, and we just made it possible for them to find a vehicle for what they want.
Well, for $10, you could donate to the pull the trigger situation here. It says this is for those who could not care less about comics but enjoyed tormenting SJWs and would enjoy the privilege of triggering them by being able to say, yeah, I did that.
Right, because if you recall on Twitter, you had a lot of SJWs crapping all over Alt Hero. And what SJWs never realize is that when they do that, it pisses people off. And so, that particular level of backing was for those people who just wanted to be able to take a public stand against the people that were doing that. They understood very well that if the Alt Hero campaign was a failure, then the SJWs were going to dance on its grave. And that was sufficient motivation for them to get involved.
You could just take a picture of yourself giving them the finger. Here's the situation. As I see it, Vox, is that you're complaining about SJWs in comics dividing and shrinking this industry by 50%. And I agree with you. I think that's a serious problem, and it's something that I struggle with just as my own little independent warrior here, to find a way to solve. I want to encourage comics to be apolitical, and to be escapism from the terrible situation that I think we're all in right now in terms of politics. I just want this one little oasis to be the way it pretty much has always been. We can go to comic books, we can read these superhero stories that contain a good set of morals, a good set of standards and ethics, heroes, people that we can aspire to be like. What you're doing here, and you're actually overtly stating it, is you're saying that Alt Hero is essentially the opposite side of the coin to SJW Marvel. You're here to agitate. You are here to irritate people that politically you are opposed to. And I don't blame you. I'm opposed to them too. Okay, I'm opposed to SJWs cramming politics where they don't belong, especially onto superhero characters that existed long before they were born. But I see these gigantic donations. $5,000 is an awful lot to give someone in the hopes that a $3 comic book, or even a series of $3 comic books, is going to see print. I mean, that is energy, that's motivation, that's politics. And here you are just kind of overtly stating
Yeah,
This
well,
is the
let me point out two things. Number one, I agree with you in terms of what your dream is and what you want to do. I want you to be able to do what you're talking about too. But I can tell you the only way you're going to be able to do that is when you have a monster like me punching them in the face and preventing them from interfering with you. The only way you're going to be left alone by those people is if there is somebody that is occupying them and driving them back and preventing them from being able to interfere with you. And so, if you look at what we're publishing, the first two projects that we've published, Quantum Mortis, A Man Disrupted, and Right Ho Jeeves, that Chuck Dixon is adapting P.G. Wodehouse. Those aren't political at all. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be publishing isn't going to be political at all.
Why not?
But
Your
because
stated goal is to drive. I mean, you're saying two things. Your stated goal is to publish comic books that drive them back.
yes,
So why would you publish something that wasn't political if that is your goal and that is the reason why these people are giving you enormous sums of money?
well, because I don't write all this stuff. The stuff that I'm writing is going to be more political. The stuff that Chuck Dixon is writing, the stuff that our other authors are writing, isn't necessarily. Some of it might be. For example, we got a submission from a Swedish comic that deals directly with the issues that are currently affecting Sweden. I would put that in the political category, even though it's very different than Alt Hero. On the other hand, the Ember War, which we just announced today, Richard Fox's science fiction series, there's nothing political about that. It's just a great science fiction story, and military science fiction. And so, in order to do the one, you have to do the other. We want to have a strong, broad-based comics publishing house. We're actually setting up two imprints. Archaven is the stuff that we produce ourselves. Dark Legion is the stuff that other people develop that they want us to publish and use our distribution channel. So we want to have a very broad-based set of product offerings, but we are always going to have the tanks. We are always going to have Alt Hero there pushing the Overton window in comics back. You're familiar with the concept of the Overton window, right?
Absolutely, but here's the situation. From my perspective, and tell me where I'm wrong. If Alt Hero is your flagship title, and it is, I mean, basically you're saying that, hey, Alt Hero is a red flag that I'm waving in front of the SJW bull to distract them from what other people are doing, so we can actually get comic books back to this apolitical status and start worrying about money now. So if Alt Hero is your flagship book, you're automatically dividing your readership and poisoning the well, because people aren't going to look at what, say, Chuck Dixon is doing, because they're going to associate what Chuck Dixon is doing with something that is radical and will seem poisonous to them. I mean, it seems poisonous to moderates.
Yeah, but we don't care. We don't care about the moderates. I mean, they will go. They will always
buy comics.
They will always follow. They will always follow the strong horse in the end. They do it. I mean, we've seen this in politics for 30 years. If you look at Trump, look at Reagan, etc., it's always the same thing. Oh, you have to go to the middle. You have to go to the middle to appease the moderates. That's exactly backwards. The way that you win the moderates is you go out and you show them what you stand for, what you're doing. You're not going to get all of them, of course not. But you don't have to. And the other thing that we want to do is that we want to grow the market. We want to grow the industry. I'm not really, there's a review of Quantum Mortis that was up, and the guy hated it, absolutely hated it. Fine, but what I thought was interesting is that the next review of it, the guy absolutely loved it. So I thought, let's look a little bit closer at what it is that they like and what they don't like. Well, the guy who hated it was basically complaining that, it wasn't an awesome Avengers where somebody or other lost her clothes and there was lots of ass kicking. Okay, that's what he likes. Fine. You know, obviously that particular comic from us is not going to appeal to him. The guy who really liked it was somebody who was a big Haruki Murakami fan. Okay, now there are millions more Murakami fans than there are people who like butt-kicking Avengers comics. You know, the whole comics industry is actually not just very small compared to the video game industry or compared to the, you know, overall book industry, but it has shrunk considerably, in part because of the business issues. You know, they've never gotten back to the 100 million comics a year being sold that were sold back in 1996. You know, this year was, you know, they kind of came back a bit because of all the movies, but now it's slumping again because, you know, either, I don't know if it's because people are tired of the movies or people are tired of the SJW crap, but regardless, you know, you're dealing with a shrinking pool if you're trying to play it the regular way. And so now maybe we're wrong. You know, maybe we'll do this and we'll find out that no, we can't bring in new readers. Maybe we'll find that, you know, like you said, we're upsetting the moderates, and they not only don't want to read alt hero, but they don't want to read anything that is tainted by any sort of degree of association, whatever. Well, you know, I don't subscribe to guilt by association. I realize other people do, and that's fine. But you know, that just doesn't even enter into our thinking. And the other thing you need to keep in mind is that we've been through this with Castelia House. We had lots of people when we first founded Castelia House. We had lots of people who were swearing that they would never work with us because, you know, I'm too controversial and Castelia is too scary and this, that, and the other thing. Well, you know, guess what? As soon as we started having success, half the people who said that they wouldn't work with us were sending us submissions. And so, you know, if you make success, then, you know, more people will find their way to you, regardless of how they happen to feel about you 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And one of the things that is incumbent on us is to not hold that against them. You know, if just because somebody happened to, I don't know, you know, threaten me with the corpse of Jack Kirby, which was one of the most bizarre threats I've ever seen. I mean, the thing that was weird was it wasn't just one guy. It was like 6 or 7 different people independently said that the corpse of Jack Kirby was going to beat me up. So anyhow, this must be a comics lingo thing. I don't know, but anyhow, you know, if somebody like that happens to come to us, you know, 2 years from now and says, "Hey, I got this great comic," you know, we're not going to hold it against them. I mean, things change, perspectives change. You know, we may be wrong. We may fail. You know, I've had lots of failures. You know, I've had lots of crazy ideas that we pursue it and it just completely doesn't work for one reason or another. But then I've also had crazy ideas that really, you know, worked really well. So far, you know, I can say that we have proceeded considerably from where we started. And so far, all of the indications are that we're going to be more successful than we expected, not less.
Well, I hope so, but I don't know what your definition of success is because, again, on the one hand, you have 2 competing goals. Your first goal is to be political, super political, and beat back SJWs. And I do believe, since you know, you mentioned that you have no particular love for comic books, I do believe that is your first and primary goal. And secondary, somewhere down the line, is making money. I wish. Here's the thing. I would love for Castelia House, and is your comic book company called Castelia House?
No.
Or is that...
Well, I mean, technically, it's part of Castelia House, but I mean, actually, Castelia House is part of a game development company. They're all like levels of stuff. But anyhow, Arkhaven is the main comic imprint.
I want Arkhaven to succeed, because my friends are working there. You have my friends in your employ, and some of them feel like they can't get work in mainstream comics because of their politics. And they found they found employment with you. And I'm deeply concerned for them because I want your main goal to be selling comics to everyone. And you're quite right when you say that the pool is shrinking. This is a result. This is a direct result, I feel, of the overwhelming and very strange and sudden politicization of these comics by intrusive left wingers who I fear have the same affinity for comic books that you do. Not much. So
Yeah, but you gotta keep in mind the best. There's two elements here. You know, you're obviously, you know, you're a great artist. Your perspective tends to focus on the creative side. But the creative side is only half the issue. In fact, I would argue that the business, the more that I've looked into this, the more I have come to the conclusion that SJWs are not even the main problem in comics. I think the main problem in comics is the diamond monopoly. And you know, that's what's driving the stores out of business. That's what's, you know, that is the biggest single problem. And so, and you know, you don't know me. And so I can understand where you might think that, you know, this, you know, oh, this is your primary goal, that's your secondary goal. Well, to be honest, at the end of the day, I like to win. I'm a gamer. This is a giant game to me, and I want to win it. And so, you know, you said, well, what defines success? I'll tell you what defines success. I want Archaven to be the number 6 comic book publishing company within 18 to 24 months. Within 5 years, I want it to be number 3. That's how I would define winning. And so maybe we can do it, maybe we can't. But if we don't envision what success looks like, and if we don't lay the foundation that allows for that success to be possible, we know we won't hit those goals.
Well, I think it's very possible. I mean, you have a great start. You have creative people working for you. I will say, I mean, Chuck Dixon. You said you're not a comic book fan. I will tell you, Chuck Dixon is a tremendous talent. For people listening who aren't aware of who Chuck Dixon is, Chuck Dixon is a longtime Batman writer and creator. Chuck Dixon created Bane. Chuck Dixon should be able to retire just from having created Bane alone. I mean, that's a once in a lifetime wonderful legacy. And you know, he's now under your employ. This is a man who knows how to do comics. So I hope.
And I listen to. I mean, you know, my comic writing has developed tremendously simply because I had the chance to edit his Avalon comics, and he went over my initial alt hero comics and just said, hey, you know, maybe you want to simplify this, maybe you want to, you know, I write 900-page fantasy novels, so you know, I tend to run on a bit. You know, maybe you want to not have a monologue here, that kind of stuff. And right. I listen. You know, I'm not interested. I mean, all I would say to those who, you know, are listening to this and just thinking, oh my God, what a jackass! I can't stand him. He doesn't belong. He doesn't understand our industry. He doesn't belong here, etc. All I would say is, you know what? We will listen, and we will learn, and we will improve. I mean, I keep the first book that we printed, the first hardcover case laminate book that Castelia printed. I always keep it right by my desk. Huh. And the reason is it reminds me of how we didn't know what the hell we were doing when we started. I mean, this book, the front cover is, the font is bad. It's off center. On back, it's off center. Inside, the paragraph spacing is wrong. I mean, literally everything is wrong except for the content, because, you know, there's a genius military historian who wrote it. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the reason I keep it is to remind me where we came from, where we started with that 3 years ago. And, you know, we've improved now to the point that when I send, you know, our authors' books to their agents or whatever, they usually come back to us and say, wow, they're so beautiful. They're so much better than, the run of the mill stuff from Random House or whatever. And that pleases me. But, you could have said the same thing 3 years ago. I don't, this jackass doesn't know a damn thing about book publishing. It's true. I didn't. We did our first test print of our first 24-page comic today. And because we have no clue what we're doing, we actually did every page with like different bleeds and different margins and all that stuff, just so we could see where the theory lined up with the reality of the printers, because we have enough experience from our publishing stuff that we've seen, even if you follow the directions perfectly, you send it to print and then suddenly, there's some stupid setting in the printer that's off and it screws it all up. So, I was talking to them today and they're like, what the heck is this? There must be some mistake. Every page is different. And I said, no. We just did it so we can pick out the best setting. They're like, oh, well, that's a good idea. I said, well, if you don't know what you're doing, then you better be aware of that and learn. And, I think what you'll find is that we will improve faster and we will improve more than you would think. We've already got a new colorist on Quantum Mortis, and we're going to throw it out to the readers to say, hey, do you want us to go? Does this approach interest you more, or do you want to kind of stick with this Dick Tracy thing? We will listen to people, and that is what is going to set us apart, I think, because from what I've seen, listening to their customers and listening to the market is not a particularly strong point for either Marvel or DC.
What'd you think of my criticism of Quantum Mortis?
I thought that it was absolutely legitimate for the crowd that you were speaking for. The
comic book buying crowd, Vox.
Yeah, but the comic book crowd is the people who buy comics today are only a small part of the people who could buy comics and might buy comics tomorrow.
That's true.
And so I am not, and also I believe that some of the philosophy that you guys have is backwards.
Tell me why.
Because you do beautiful art, you do beautiful images, but the story, I think, in comics is often sacrificed to the images. And, I know that Jack Kirby told his stories through images and so forth, but when I look at the more popular comics from both a long time ago and more recently, like for example, Sandman has less action and more talking than Quantum Mortis did. Now, Watchmen is often much the same way. I mean, my God, I don't know if you've read Jerusalem by Alan Moore, but that guy goes on longer than I do. And so those comics were obviously extremely successful, and so I think that the rules that the philosophy that you're talking about is not incorrect. I just think that it is not as all-encompassing as someone who is as adept in applying them as like you are might think.
Yeah, I just think that comic books are, and I mean, this is the wheel, and I'm not sure about if reinventing the wheel is necessarily going to work for you, but you can try it. Comic books are just serialized storytelling. Mm-hmm. You're talking about Sandman by Neil Gaiman. I mean, those stories are poetry. They are,
but they're not. By our literary standards, they're inferior. Neil Gaiman is not a better fiction author than I am. He is not a better fiction author than John C. Wright. As a comic writer, he's legendary. I know this. But, I've read his books. They're okay. I mean, he's actually not very original. He is really heavily dependent on ripping off mythologies, and so you need to keep in mind that we are coming at it from, a different form of storytelling. And so, whether that will prove to be popular or not, I don't know. But what I do know is that the only way that you find this stuff out is if you try it. And so far, like for example, the Woodhouse stuff. My wife is totally appalled that we're doing a Woodhouse comic. She thinks it's like practically blasphemy. Because the beauty of Woodhouse is in the interplay of his words. And she's like, why would you ever do a graphic novel of this? I said, look, there's a whole lot of people who maybe have never read Woodhouse who will get exposed to it through this. Maybe they'll go on to read it. Maybe they won't. But if nothing else, they will at least get 15 to 20% of the effect of reading true Woodhouse, in a regular book. And that is much better than, I think, is much better, much more entertaining than a lot of other things that you could read.
Well, I will tell you that Neil Gaiman has found his audience, and people have decided that Neil Gaiman is an excellent comic book writer and an excellent author. And I mean, it might be a matter of taste, but you'll find that the majority of people disagree with you and think Neil Gaiman is actually an A+ lister and deserving of a lot of respect.
Oh, I respect. First of all, he's an A+ lister as a comic, but as a he doesn't compare to Murakami. He doesn't compare to Echo. He doesn't compare to Mom. He doesn't compare to Maupassant. I mean, it's not even close.
But you just compared him to yourself.
Yeah, because that's probably about the level. I mean, if you read the reviews of my my Throne of Bones and A Sea of Skulls, you'll see people say, well, it's better than George Martin, not as good as Tolkien. I'll take that.
All right. So that aside, I think that you will find that when it comes to comic books are a visual medium, and you are coming from the standpoint of a novelist.
Yeah, but I'm a game
Everything-
designer too. Don't forget that. I've been
Yeah.
in a visual medium for a long time. Don't just because I'm not an artist doesn't mean that I don't have any sense of visual storytelling. And of course, I'm not doing any of the art. I'm only writing my own comics. The other stuff, the Chuck stuff, our other authors, they're all doing their own thing. We're just publishing that. So that's what one of the other things I'd point out is, if you're going to judge, you can judge my writing by the stuff I write, but you certainly cannot judge my writing by the way Chuck Dixon adapts P.G. Woodhouse. I mean, that literally has nothing to do with me.
No, I mean the only thing that I know right now is Quantum Mortis #1 and the preview that I've seen of Alt Hero, and that's all I have to judge you by. You were good enough to send me a few of your novels digitally, and I will absolutely read those because I'm interested in you. I find you to be an interesting guy, and I think that here's one thing that I've noticed about you, and tell me what you think about this. There are a lot of people, or there's a certain kind of person who's able to, out of sheer force of will and self-confidence, make things happen. And it's not necessarily because they know what they're doing, but they're able to convince other people that they know what they're doing. And therefore, they're assisted and they also manage to just find their way and succeed. And you know who's like that? Our president.
Oh, no question. I mean,
What do you think about that? Is that you?
yeah, I mean, it is in some ways. I've been called the Donald Trump of science fiction before, so it's not the first time I've heard that. But um, the thing I think that is lost in that, and actually I think that this is always lost when people talk about Trump, is that what it really comes down to is, do you have the ability to articulate a vision and a path that other people believe in? And when I actually got fired by my own father from his company for that very reason. when I was 22, I think, I was working for my dad's company, and I really wanted to push into the game space, using 3D hardware to make games, because at the time, they were not using that. So Chris Taylor, the guy who's the designer who's now with Wargaming, he and I had talked about it, and my dad called me into his office and said, "Yeah, I think we have to let you go." I was like, "You're gonna fire your own son?" He said, "Well, I mean, that's a harsh way to put it." He said, "But there's only room for one vision in a company, and you have a different vision, and all my programmers want to quit and work for you. So you need to go and do what you're going to do with your own people and leave us to our vision," which I thought was actually a really good way of putting it. And so, that's what we did then. And that's what we're doing now. And, when you, I mean, this is going to sound a little strange because obviously I'm extremely arrogant in some ways, but when you are willing to put your ego aside, however big it might be, and just hand responsibility and hand authority over to good, talented people and get the hell out of their way, as long as they get the vision, that's when success happens. I mean, that's how we created Infogalactic. That's how we created Castelia House. That's how we've got Alpenwolf has 5 games in development, and we're about to do something that frankly is a lot more stupid than getting into comics. We're actually going to start our own, video game publisher. That's a much, we're going to have a free site, where, you can play and, play for free, but you can also, get into the virtual goods and all that kind of stuff. But, we kept trying to work with other publishers, and they kept, screwing it up one way or another. So finally we just said, screw it, let's do it ourselves. And we just decided this last week. Trust me, that is a lot more, that's a much tougher project technologically, and it is, probably more insane than what we're doing in the comic space. But we have great people. They all get the vision. And frankly, just like with the comics, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. That was not the vision that I had for it originally, but, circumstances changed. Guys on the team said, "Hey, we want to do this." So I thought, okay, fine, let's do it. Like with Chuck, he doesn't ask me about things. I don't know. I love reading the scripts when he sends them to me because it's all new to me. I just said, here, you have our Gotham, and here's a really good map guy, and here's the larger world that it has to, connect to. Now do whatever the hell you want. And that's what he's doing. I mean, that's why he's so, we talk all the time. That's why he's so enthusiastic about it, because he's doing whatever the hell he wants to do. And, that's what we have to offer other creators.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good play. When Archaven gets established, I mean, obviously right now, baby steps, we'll do another Kickstarter probably. And once enough of the stuff has come out, then we'll do another Kickstarter in, I don't know, April, May timeframe, whatever. Find out. And again, the purpose of Kickstarter is not to bring in money. People think the purpose of a Kickstarter is to bring in money. It's not. It's to test the market and find out what they want versus what they don't want. So I mean, a failed Kickstarter is actually a huge blessing in disguise, because that prevents you from wasting, months, years, whatever, on stuff that people don't want anyhow. So we're going to, as we grow, we're going to bring in more artists. We're going to bring in more writers. And as long as their general vision is something that fits within the broad framework of ours, they can do whatever the hell they want.
What's that broad framework? What do you mean?
We would not publish stuff that was SJW. We don't want anything to do with any SJWs in any way, shape, or form, because they always end up destroying things. It doesn't matter if it's the NFL or NASCAR or comics or anything. They will, if you're interested in knowing why, read SJWs Always Double Down. It gets into the whys and wherefores of the psychology, but we've learned that. But in terms of if somebody wanted to do I don't know, you've got that popular cyberfrog thing that if somebody came to us and said, hey, I really want to do, wasn't it cyberfrog? I thought.
Yeah, cyberfrog, absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, look, it would not. Cyberfrog is not something that I would have dreamed up in a million years. Cyberoid amphibians is not something I can literally say I've never ever thought of that. But if somebody came to us and said, hey, I've got this cool stuff about these cyberoid battling amphibians and so forth, hey, why not? As long as it's good. And we do that with Castalia. I mean, that's the other thing you need to keep in mind. We have a track record. You can look at what we publish with Castalia. We do stuff that nobody in their right mind would touch. We have this one book. Do you know who Gene Wolfe is, the writer?
No, I don't.
Okay. Gene Wolfe is an extremely well-regarded author in science fiction. He's probably considered the most literary one. And all of his stuff is just really deep with all these references and so forth. He's about like 80 something years old, and he's got this huge huge collection of short stories and novels and whatever. So we actually published, I believe it's called, it's a literary criticism of all the short stories and novels that he wrote from like 1951 to 1989. It's like 900 pages. It's only volume 1. It's totally unintelligible. I mean, I've read like 10 of the guy's novels and I couldn't make head or tails of this book. And when we decided to publish it just because we knew that nobody else would publish it. And so we thought, we're only going to sell 50 copies of this, but who cares? It's kind of a nice thing to be able to say that we did and so forth. And I even called up Mr. Wolfe to, let him know about it and send him a copy. And he said, what sort of madman would do this? And, it's totally crazy. But the funniest thing is that it ended up selling like 350 copies. I mean, I would have bet pretty much everything we had that we were not going to sell more than 50. But, that's one of the cool things about being in that position is that, you can help other people realize their visions. And, as long as it's not one that, we're pro Western civilization. And, I happen to be a Christian myself, so we're not going to publish stuff that is, anti-Western civilization. We're not going to publish stuff that is, satanic or whatever. But other than that, sky's the limit. And, hopefully in, a year or two, we'll have enough of a market going that we'll be able to, bring in, lots of people doing the kind of stuff that you're talking about, that is, just good stories, no politics, et cetera, et cetera. We'll keep doing Alt Hero. We'll keep doing that kind of stuff. But we're also, we want to do Ember War. We want to do Faraway Wars. We want to do, maybe we want to do more Quantum Mortis. We want to do Throne of Bones. We have a ton of stuff that we want to do, none of which has anything to do with Alt Hero. Alt Hero is just the way for us to carve out our space in the market.
I'm afraid Alt Hero is going to poison everything else that you want to do subsequently. What do you think of that?
Well, it hasn't happened Alt Hero is much tamer than some of the books that we publish with Castalia, and it's had quite the opposite effect. You got to keep in mind, everybody knows that they're under attack by SJWs. Everybody is afraid of saying the wrong thing, of getting called out, of losing their job, they're all afraid of it. And suddenly, when they see other people standing up and basically saying, you know what, fuck off,
Mm-hmm.
that actually I think it's going to have a very different effect. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right in the short term, but I think that what's going to happen, because I mean, comics is not really any more SJW converged than science fiction is. I mean, you cannot get more whacked out. I mean, in the science fiction world, for example, you don't have a lot of people going, I'm actually a 64th gender yellow dragon otherkin. You don't have that much of that in comics. There's a ton of it in science fiction. I mean, these people are serious whack jobs, and some of them are actually in fairly influential positions in science fiction. And so the fact that the exact opposite effect happened there, the fact that we stood up to that and told them all to take a hike, made us more popular, not less popular. I suspect, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I suspect we'll see something of the same effect in comics that we did in science fiction.
I'm interested to see, Vox. You're a very pleasant man. I enjoy talking to you.
Likewise. I mean, the thing is like we talked a little bit about before we started, people need to distinguish between the macro and the micro. The fact that I am on the warpath against SJWs on a macro level doesn't mean that I'm going to be impolite to somebody on a personal level. All of the terrible, if you look at all the terrible things that, and you can find lots of quotes from me on the internet. If you look at all these terrible, horrible, awful things that I have said to people, you will see that in almost every situation, it is a response. And not only that, but it is a response after considerable and multiple provocations. And so I'm not excusing it. I'm not apologizing it. I'm simply pointing it out.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate your coming on, and I wonder if now might be a good time if you'd be willing to maybe answer some Q&A questions that I will moderate
Love to.
from the crowd. So, guys, if you are interested in asking Vox Dei a question, now would be a good time to ask it. I won't keep him on for too long, maybe just another 30 minutes or so. We will do it that way. So bring it on. Oh, chat has been very, very busy.
Good.
Gordon Runkle says, Ethan, you really should join Arkhaven.
Oh, we'd love to have you. You know that.
You have a big supporter there in Gordon Runkle. That's a good thing. There's a lot of just crazy stuff in here. Baghead777 asks, are traps gay?
I will defer that question to. I'll defer that question.
Okay, that's fine. What Philip Pierce says, what's the worst thing you have ever seen in gaming or comics?
Okay, the worst thing I've ever seen in comics is probably that Lady Thor exchange where she's facing off with another woman who's supposed to be a villain who punches out her boyfriend and then surrenders to Lady Thor rather than fighting her because of her respect for girl power. It was the dumbest thing that I've ever seen in comics myself. In gaming, let's see. I mean, honestly, Depression Quest, which kicked off Gamergate, is the worst thing I've ever seen. Although there was actually a porno game. It was a MPEG decompression porno game back in like 1995 that somebody sent me. That was it was just the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. So that was I don't remember the name of it, but there was some experimentation with trying to blend MPEG video, porn, and computer games that was definitely a failed experiment. And the worst fiction I've ever read was a Shadowrun book where they had this whole scene set up. It seemed like it was a romantic thing and whatever. And then suddenly, without any warning, airborne elves with wings showed up and blew the girl up with a bazooka.
Mhm.
It was impressively bad.
Hey, so Edwin Boyette, thank you for the super chat. What does Vox think of Del Arraz? Is that how to pronounce his name? I've never heard it spoken. Del Arraz.
Delarose.
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 Okay. Being banned from Worldcon. And he says that I and you and Delarose are his favorite people in the creative space.
Huh. Well, thank you, first of all. I think that John probably had no serious interest in going to Worldcon at all, and I think he's just playing them. You know, John's a smart guy. He's actually writing 2 of the alt hero novels, and we're going to be publishing one of the comic scripts that he's doing. He's actually doing the adaptation of the Ember War. That being said, John can be a bit of a flamethrower, and I wouldn't. A lot of people, see us as being some sort of twins or something. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but he's a good guy, and he writes very well, and we're looking forward to publishing his stuff.
He sticks up for you big time. He chases me down. If I ever criticize you, John is.
Tell him to lay off. I'm always happy to get substantive criticism.
All right. I do tell him to lay off. I tell him to go away. Go away, John. Just kidding. Let's see. Aaron Alvarez says, do you think comics are a lower form of art compared to literature?
I think everything is a lower form of art compared to literature, with the possible exception of some classical music.
Thank you.
Movies, whatever. I mean, you can't go as in depth. I mean, what I would compare comics to is I tend to view them as almost being like short stories. You have to have a discipline, and you have to have an almost ruthless discipline if you're going to tell the story well in a way that's going to hold the reader's attention. And so, the more time I spend writing comic stuff, the more I find myself thinking about, okay, how would Mom have done this? How would Maupassant have done this? And they're all short, they're the great short story writers. I don't find myself ever thinking, how would Umberto Eco have handled this? We don't have 500 pages to do the pictures. So, but I mean, just because it's I love literature, and that's always kind of going to be the high point for the summit for me.
Battle Dime says, who are Vox Dei's favorite comic book artists?
I don't think I know comic book artists well enough to have a favorite. I know that there's the one guy that I think is really good is Sergio. I think he does some like religious comics or something.
Mm-hmm.
His stuff is really good. Obviously, your stuff is really good, Ethan.
Thanks.
I just don't know the name. I've been studying up on this stuff, but I haven't bothered really acquainting myself with the great artists and colorists, because number one, they're under contract with folks, and number two, we can't afford them yet. And so, that spending time on that would be a bit of would sort of be getting ahead of ourselves, I think.
RLC Comics wants to know, do you consider yourself a culture warrior?
I wouldn't say that I consider myself that, but I think it's perfectly reasonable for somebody else to consider me that. I mean, we have a saying in Gamergate, all I wanted to do is play video games. And now I'm uncovering an ancient pedophile death cult. It's a meme that is out there, and to a certain extent, that's kind of how I feel. All I really want to do is write my stories and make my games, but the SJWs made it impossible for me to just do that and be left alone, and so here we are. And that's the other thing I'd point out to all of you. All of you could be exactly where I am now in a year or 2 or 3, because I didn't get singled out because of anything I did. I was a life member in good standing of the Science Fiction Writers Association for like as many as 12 years with no incident, serving on the Nebula juries, all that kind of stuff, no problem whatsoever. And then you get singled out and you get targeted and you get swarmed. Next thing you know, you're like, slashing off heads and covered with blood and screaming, "Die, motherfuckers!" And and you're kind of like, what happened? I just wanted to write my books.
Yeah. Well, okay. So somebody wants to know if you are going to. Okay, James Hayes, are you going to make any games related to your comic books?
Oh, hell yeah. We've already got an alt hero role-playing game in the works. We are, in fact, actually, one thing that we really want to do is we have this amazing trivia game called Game Brain, and it's a whole new trivia concept. And I think one of the things that I want to do soon is find some people and do a Comics Brain trivia game, because nobody's really done anything like that yet. But we will definitely do some games that are related to this. We have a really good engine, a strategy game engine that we're working on. I think it would be kind of fun to do a game set in Avalon where you're taking the role of Shade or somebody and trying to fight crime, but do it from a strategy game perspective. There's a lot of different possibilities, but we will definitely be exploring some of them.
Beautiful. I love it. That's how to do it. I mean, you really want to take these characters that you're going to be creating with your creative people and utilize your knowledge in gaming to actually make games for them. That's actually a great idea.
Well, the funny thing is, Marvel. My favorite game designer from back in the day is Steve Faulkner, and he actually they actually took his Puzzle Quest game and turned it into like Marvel Puzzle Quest or something. We could do something like that very, very easily.
This is an interesting question. I don't know how you're going to answer this, but Wildcard Productions says, Vox Dei, are you concerned about the damage that something like Alt Hero will do to other small publishers that rise up in the future?
What damage is that? Frankly, I think that the small publishers are going to flock to us because Diamond is the biggest problem with a small publisher right now is Diamond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you're a small publisher, get in touch with me, and I'll either if we can't help you, then our partner can, and you definitely want to get hooked up with our partner because they're very, very big, and they will treat you very, very well.
Carl P wants to know, how do you pick new writers and/or books?
Well, we haven't done that many yet, so I mean the way that we picked the writer, you have to keep in mind, I didn't know who Chuck Dixon was when we did the Alt Hero Kickstarter, and all these people, in fact, I think it was John Delarose who was all excited that Chuck Dixon backed your Kickstarter. I'm like, who's Chuck Dixon? And why are people excited? And then he explained it, and so I actually called Chuck up, just said, hey, thank you for supporting this, it's very kind of you and so forth. He's like, yeah, just I think it's great somebody's finally doing something like this. And I said, well, is there any chance that you might be interested in writing with us? And he said, here's my page, right? Sure, why not? And then I said, well, yeah, but what if we actually made it your thing, you know? And that's when he got very interested. And here's the funny thing, though. He stole the Woodhouse adaptation from me. That was my idea. I mean, I was thinking, hey, there's this public domain Woodhouse stuff. I love Woodhouse. The artist, Gary Kwappitz, who used to do, who did Savage Sword of Conan, he loves Woodhouse. And so we were talking, and he said, I'm kind of looking for just a side project. I said, well, what about Woodhouse? I said, I could adapt it, and you could draw it, be funny. And he's like, oh, that's great. And then I made the mistake of telling Chuck Dixon about it. And he's like, I love Woodhouse. You have to let me in on this. So I said, okay, fine. Great. I'll co-write something with Chuck Dixon. That'll be pretty cool. And then 2 days later, I get like 6 finished pages from Gary. I mean, the art, the script, everything's done, And I called them up. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And they're like, oh yeah, you can contribute too. I'm like, there's nothing to do. And they're like, I said, should I just get out of the way? And Chuck's like, yeah, we'll give you a courtesy edit. So that edited by Vox Dei is like the biggest courtesy edit you've ever seen, because the whole thing is my idea, and Chuck stole it, and he's a thief, and we're not going to forget this.
1776er says, Ethan, he is correct about Diamond, and you seem to be avoiding that point. 1776er, I'm not avoiding it. I'm kind of shrugging at it and conceding it in a way. I'm just saying, okay, if there's something better, there's something better. I'm not arguing.
Well, and it's also not your area. I mean, why would you have spent any time going over that stuff?
Yeah. Somebody says that you should publish my Rainbow Brute. That's a great idea. I agree. I took girls' toy properties and made them male.
Yes, I saw that. Hey, look, I don't think there's any question about your ability to produce great stuff. We would be more than happy to work with you at any point in time.
Ethan Van Scriber, who was a parody account based on me, says, ask him if he's planning on getting a new artist for Quantum Mortis. Now, Ethan, quote unquote, I actually heard from the artist who was very upset with me on Twitter, and he said that very little to do with the adaptation of the book, that it was all his doing, and I was blaming Vox when it was really all his fault, and that I was wrong on all my criticisms. To which I say, Vox, first of all, is that true?
It is true that he did all the adaptation and stuff. I think, but I mean, he's doing what I wanted him to do anyhow. So I don't think it's, first of all, he's not upset with you. He just didn't think it was fair for me to get blamed for stuff that he felt was his fault.
Well, that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to say it's interesting that you just went, oh, well, I'll take the criticism on my shoulders anyway. Like, at no point did Vox Dei point that out, that this was not his doing, that it was someone else adapting his work. And he may or may not align with how it was done. He just kind of took the criticism on his own shoulders, which I admire. I thought that was really, really cool. And had I not just pointed it out, none of you would have known that.
But the thing is, we like to learn this stuff. We like to hear the substantive criticism. We will be doing different coloring there. We're going to keep the general art theme the same. We're going to keep the general adaptation theme the same, because I want that. Now, he's the only illustrator on Quantum Mortis and Man Disrupted, but there's already 2 other artists who have approached me and said, hey, we'd like to do some work with you, and we will probably put one of them on a Quantum Mortis one-off, because we have 2 full novels and 1 novella and several short stories in the Quantum Mortis universe. Plus, we're going to have some more game stuff coming out in that universe. We're actually doing a really cool thing. I won't mention the names, but people who are familiar with science fiction will recognize both names. We're creating a author versus author book where two military science fiction experts, both of whom are actual former military officers, are basically going to be writing from the perspective of a soldier on the other, each on the other side, and then we're basically doing it as a war game approach with me as the referee. And so that's going to be an interesting. I mean, it might work, it might not work, but as you're probably starting to figure out now, I just like to try stuff. And one thing I learned from Cernovich is try 10 different things, push more resources to the stuff that works, and if it doesn't work, let it go.
Everybody wants to know about your friendship with Milo Yiannopoulos.
Actually, I mean, Milo and I are friends, no question. But he is actually probably better friends with my wife.
Oh, I see.
So the last time we hosted the Gamergate event, and then he ended up taking us around the red light district of Paris until some ungodly hour in the morning. And he's I like him a lot. He's an absolutely rare talent. And I think that the way that he was treated by the media last year was astonishingly unfair. And I also think that he has a much better chance to win his lawsuit against Simon & Schuster than anyone would ever imagine.
You think so, really?
Let's just say that I'm familiar with the contents of some of the Simon & Schuster emails.
Oh, how about that? I follow that story.
Remember, they're my old publisher.
Oh boy. Yeah, I do like Milo. I wish him well. Okay, well, I'm gonna wrap it up here. The chat's getting wacky. they're on another.
I apologize. It's probably the Dread Elk doing what they do.
It's some of my guys and some of your guys, and together they're making a mess. But I very much appreciate having you on, Vox. I wish you luck. I hope you take my criticism in stride, and know that I mean it only because I do want you to succeed, because I want comic books to succeed, and I think people who have who create work for other creators, who offer opportunities to other creators, I want them all to succeed. I'm also very much against the SJWs, having endured a horrific SJW assault myself this year. I know exactly of what you speak, and I want them defeated. So I do appreciate some of the things that you say, and I'm grateful that you came on my humble little channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Cool. All right. Good night, everyone.